feedback started coming in that, hey, actually I don't want to take the full-time program. The opportunity cost is too high if I just want to do a part-time. And actually then the process started almost immediately after the budget last year to look into this and to see whether a part-time option could be offered.
Advantage that vouchers has over cash is that it can also support our heartland merchants and our hawkers. Because if you give cash, what can Singaporeans do with it? You can save it in the bank, go Japan,
Or go GB,
stand there.
Oh, and just go, right?
These are borders and we can't do much about it. This one, okay, you can support the local economy, support our businesses.
In fact, social spending has doubled. We are open to see whether there's a need to do more. I think never say never.
Welcome back to Chills with TFC. I'm your host, Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and today is an important episode. I've been doing this for many years. so we've been covering the budget for many years. I'm very excited to take this to the next level, right? And so I'm joined with Adrian.
Hello, everyone. People from young listen to you until old.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh. Are you sure?
Confirm.
Yeah. But on the budget series, right? So Adrian joined me on the budget series. I think we did 6 episodes. Yeah. So I asked you on to today's episode because you were seen as the angriest guy on the.
I will debate that.
You'll debate that, right?
That was my gentle day.
Yeah. Okay, so today is a real day, right? And today being the real day, we are very excited to be joined with the directors from Ministry of Finance, right? To help us understand why things are done this way, right? So I don't want to talk about voucher. I think what is important for our audience, especially for the Financial Coconut audience, is like, why are things done this way? Right, so who better to have than you guys are? So for our audience that don't know you, maybe you could introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ming Jing. I'm actually Director of Social Programs in MOF. So what that means is I actually oversee the budgets for the social ministries. That's MOE, MOM, MOH, and MSF. Other than that, I also have a small team that oversees the assurance package and the GST voucher scheme. These are actually long-standing schemes that have been put in place to help with cost of living and other expenses.
We will get into that later, But on that note, right, like, why are you doing this, right? Because why I ask, because usually my sense of people that do all the social assurance, the social, more on the softer side, they all have some sort of mission somewhere. you know what I mean? Right. So like, of all the things that you can do in policy work, why are you here?
I do have a very strong interest in social policy.
I know. Everybody that I talk to that is in this category, all got something to say.
Yeah. In my past experience, I actually did start at MOF in fiscal policy. That's what we call like the center of MOF. But I moved on to deal with CPF policy and retirement policy, as well as healthcare policy. And it's been a very strong interest of mine to look at how our social policies benefit Singaporeans as a whole. And when the opportunity came up to come back to MOF to oversee the social ministries as a whole, I thought it was a very good opportunity for me to then take a higher vantage point to look across the different social policies in Singapore and how they all fit together.
We'll go there later. Yes. And John, for our audience that don't know you.
First of all, thanks to Reggie and Adrian for having us on the show. I'm John. I'm the Director for Security and Resilience Programs in MOF. And what that means is that, just like what Ming Jing said, I also oversee the budgets, the resourcing of ministries. But the ministries that my team oversees would be the security ministries, including MHA, MINDEF.
The more intense ones.
It depends, yeah.
It depends on where we're going, right?
Yeah. Also, the budgets of ministries in the tech sector like MDDI, Smart Nation, and then some of the organs of state and the central other ministries as well. So for the budget, I am the budget director for budget 2025.
So we got the boss here. Can ask the hard questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Can ask the hard questions. But maybe for a start, right, just for the fun of it, warm up for our audience, right? Can you kind of give us an idea, how does the whole budget come together? Because there are all these different ministries, everybody want money, and then the people also want money, right? They want this, they want that, we want all sorts of things, especially amongst the middle class, we want expanded social policies, we want a lot of these things too. It's getting quite crazy and quite hard out there, right, for a lot of the people, working professionals. Even the working professionals feel the pinch, right? So there are all these things that we want, but how does it actually come together from your vantage point?
I think the first thing I might want to do is also highlight the difference between the budget statement and the budget. So there are a lot of people, as you say, they'll be like, hey, this year, why got nothing for me? I'm middle class, and this budget talks about help for low income, seniors, whatever. It's nothing for me.
You're talking to that person.
Yeah. yeah. So let me try and assuage this. Actually, I think what they're referring to is the budget statement, right? So, PM delivered the statement in February 18. And that actually is basically kind of like the highlights of the budget, right? And then he'll cover some of the new policies that we rolled out. I mean, CDCV, SG60 vouchers, climate, all this. And then people look down the list and think, okay, do I get this? Do I get this? Do I get this? But that's not the whole budget. Actually, the whole budget is the $140 billion that is impossible to cover in a 90-minute speech. If he wants to talk about it, it's going to have to go on
for days.
Maybe days, yeah. But because the budget book, which summarizes the budget, is, this thick. There's a command paper, even like 300 plus pages, even thicker. So that's the budget for real. And I think there are two kind of different processes there's a budget statement process, right? And then there's a whole budget process. And I think the budget process is interesting because that is something that takes place over the course of the year, right? Basically, the ministries have all their plans. And actually, some of these plans were announced, several budgets ago, their own committee of supply. The budgets have already been sort of voted down to them, and they continue these plans, right? Then there's a process where MOF and the agency will, discuss, okay, what is your budget going to be for the next 5 years? And it's quite a long, prolonged discussion about how to finance, resource all these plans. Yeah, it's quite a bilateral process. And that's kind of behind the scenes. It doesn't take place in the public eye. And that forms actually the bulk of the budget. Whereas the budget statement really focuses on some of the highlights, right? People will look at maybe the transfer, some of the new policies and schemes. And yes, some of these will actually go into the ministry's long-term plans and part of the block budget. Most of the budget is actually in that budget, not the budget statement. Right. So when people say, I don't benefit from the budget, actually they're forgetting, they benefit a lot from like public infra, right? You're talking parks, talking subsidized hawker centers, MRTs, all this, right?
He's speaking to the middle class. Parks is the first one. Bishan Park, so that type. Yeah.
Yeah. Then there's, public goods, of course, street lighting. A lot of your audience studies economics, right? Very savvy about this. Right? All these public goods like defense, police, all this, right? You're enjoying all these things as part of the budget too. And then there's also public services, subsidized education, subsidized healthcare, and so on. So these are the things that you will benefit from as part of the budget, right? But of course, I think people are also interested in how the budget statement comes to be.
Yeah.
I think this part, we have gone out before to say, okay, look, actually in the run-up to the budget, there's quite a lot of feedback that we take in, right? So we have both closed door as well as public feedback sessions, right? So the closed door sessions will invite people like tax professionals, accountants, social sector researchers, academics, tax professionals. So they'll come in and then they'll give us their views on budget, right? On what they think the next budget should have. Many of these people are also, close to the ground, like social sector leaders, researchers, very deep in these domains. They have a very intimate sense of what the domain needs. And then they'll reflect some of these concerns to us. And actually, we note down everything, all these suggestions. Then it may not be that those suggestions can be immediately implemented, that budget. But for sure, we are thinking about them. We might look at it for the next budget or the following one after that. But, rest assured, we do actually take all this feedback into account. And then, of course, there's the public-facing feedback sessions. We have sessions with Reach, with the youth. That's where it's quite open. People will come in and, we have these themes that we say, okay, the budget, we want to talk about the families, we want to talk about workers and so on. But then usually everybody starts talking about their own pet peeves a bit. You can imagine now, right?
It's true. I've been on a few of the MDDI runs, I know.
So for this particular year, is there any area of feedback that has significantly influenced this year's budget?
Or maybe what are the things coming up? Because you did say some things we can't implement now, but we are looking at
that's what I had in mind.
broader future. Yeah, any thoughts there for us?
This area of skills upgrading, SkillsFuture has been actually on the agenda for quite a long time. And just to give a very concrete example of how the budget process takes in feedback. If you recall last year at Budget 2024, this big push in SkillsFuture was announced, in the SkillsFuture Level Up program, which offers up to, say, $3,000 in training allowance when you do a full-time program. It was a very big feature of the budget last year. But actually soon after that, feedback started coming in that, hey, actually I don't want to take the full-time program. The opportunity cost is too high if I just want to do a part-time. And actually then the process started almost immediately after the budget last year to look into this and to see whether a part-time option could be offered. And this year's budget, then, the announcement came out that we would be offering a part-time option for SkillsFuture. That is one very concrete example of how the budget process works, and also the discussions between MOF and the ministries, how that iterative process takes place.
Since you brought up SkillsFuture,
Trigger.
you had a lot of things to say about SkillsFuture. You want to ask, like how has it improved over time?
Yeah, I think it would be good to really learn from
Your point of view,
because anecdotally, I would say that the feedback on SkillsFuture is a bit 50-50 in terms of the effectiveness of someone trying to get back into the job market. But having said that, year after year, we still see, then we're going to do a bit more on SkillsFuture. We're going to change it a little bit, but the pillar is still the same. How has that evolved to meet the evolving needs of
you
people
brought it up
as well as the
not we.
economy?
Actually, it's a never-ending journey, right? I think last year's push for the Level Up program was a big one. Actually, when we announced it to the media, when we announced it to the public, the reaction was quite strong, quite positive. It made me feel like I want to go for an upgrading course when actually past efforts did not. So I think that was a significant change. Whether it is enough in its own, actually it is part of a wider ecosystem. What we see as SkillsFuture, we usually see it as just what individual gets in order to reskill or upgrade. A lot of complementary efforts need to go on to support that. It cannot work on its own because as an individual, hey, how do I know what course to go for? Future employer that I want to change to accept whatever I've gone for as well. So the ecosystem actually is something that's also in the works. Actually, the key partners, MOE, MOM, WSG, even MTI, I think are very important. They've put in place what we call the demand side strategy, which is to work with employers to actually create programs that allow things like attachments, what we call place and train or train and place. So either way, both programs exist. And they actually support the employers to take on people who are looking to change careers, give them some support, and in the hope that that period of introduction and transition then allows that person to successfully hop onto a new journey. This is the theory. Right? This is the theory.
I love it.
What we call usually in MOF, we call it a theory of change. Whenever a ministry comes in with a new proposal, we ask, what is your theory of change? And I think this is a theory of change. But to actually implement it is challenging. I think not going to lie about that. And there's a lot of background hard work that goes on behind the scenes. Let's say within the tripartite partners, employers themselves, the unions, they need to see which organizations are willing to step up to offer such attachments. You need progressive employers, obviously. Then, of course, you need the individuals themselves to put in the effort. And that's also something which is not as easy as just giving out money. I give out money, but if the behavioral change doesn't happen, people are not sort of ready to take the step forward, then the change won't happen either. I think that is why you are not seeing the full-fledged benefits of this almost a decade-long sort of effort already, because it is difficult. And I think along the way, the agencies have been continuously tweaking the programs to make them more effective. They welcome ideas on how to do it better for sure. But I do feel last year's SkillsFuture Level Up program is a big change, and we hope that this one would really make a difference.
So based on that, you've seen a higher level of adoption? You've seen
not
that?
yet, because
Not yet.
it's just started only, so we still have to wait. But
at least people
really,
are talking about it.
Yeah, at least it has generated, I think, much more interest than what it was.
No, I mean, it's fair, right? Because previously when people lose their jobs, then they have to find the immediate next thing that is available. So, it creates a certain behavior, of just finding what's next. So everybody end up in like temp jobs, or some sort, right? Of course, and I think this is a part where provide that transition so that you don't need to latch onto the immediate next thing. I think that's interesting. But it took some time. Like on the ground, you hear all sorts of feedback. So after the budget, I'm sure you've heard all sorts of things. Maybe your colleagues say don't watch first, or something like that, right? So it's like how we put out content, then don't read the comment section first. You let it do your thing first, right? Because it will affect you. But all that aside, I think one question that's floating around the internet would be the whole voucher thing, right? So we're here. So, everybody was like, oh, why so many vouchers? Why don't just give us cash? Or don't tax us so much, right? That whole narrative just floats around the internet. So would give you an opportunity to talk a little bit. Why vouchers? Why not cash?
And why so many different versions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because honestly, I also get this question a lot, from friends. We hear it on
And it's not just the
channels as
corner
well.
of the internet, right?
Yeah,
Like amongst
yeah,
my
yeah.
friends, we also
Yeah, it's
talk
a pretty
about this. Like,
common,
what is
yeah.
this voucher for?
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
that website also lah.
I must say, initially, it feels shook.
Yeah,
It's like you get so many things, right? But then after a while, it's like, I'm confused.
What's going on, right? Yeah. So you give us some thoughts.
Well, first of all, I think the question about, why did you give vouchers instead of cash? I thought maybe it's helpful to clarify also that actually we are still giving cash, right? Actually, this year, I think it's August, we are giving out GST voucher. December, there's another round where we give out the assurance package or AP, we call it AP for short. So there's still cash going out. It's just that it was announced in last year's budget, right? And we didn't announce it again in this year's budget. So there's still cash. And I think the reason why we then gave vouchers on top of that cash, well, first of all, I think we recognize that there's quite a lot of feedback still. Cost of living is high, inflation is high. Although inflation has come down, right? Since the high, 2 years ago, I think it was 6+%. And last year, it came down to 2-ish%. Even though the rates have come down, I think we recognize levels are still high. And I think psychologically, it is something to get used to, a new high watermark. And we hear a lot of feedback about that. And I think that's why we wanted to do something to support Singaporeans. And so we decided on the voucher route, I think, for a couple of reasons. So first of all, we've done the CDC voucher thing quite a lot, had some experience with it. And actually, we've gotten quite a lot of good feedback about it, right? So people who use them tell us, hey, if we find it very easy to use, it's helpful to us. Every time we want to spend it, it's right there. And the merchants also give good feedback to us as well. Right, so that's
because next day they can encash, right? And so
there's some tricks like
there's something to that. And I was like, oh, this is very good because it essentially thought about the cash flow turnaround on the neighborhood merchants, right? The fishball uncle, when I said can CDC, it's like okay. I was like, why are you so happy, right? So that is a big function of understanding the business, right? As compared to other grants, right? That's a different discussion. But just for this CDC, ecosystem is quite interesting.
So we get good feedback, and that's why we're like, okay, look, it's well received on the ground, then that's definitely a good sign for us. It's a strong modality to give out, to disperse our assistance. The other thing is, advantage that vouchers has over cash is that it can also support our heartland merchants and our hawkers. Because if we give cash, what can Singaporeans do with it? You can save it in the bank, go Japan,
or go JB,
spend there.
Or and just go, right?
These are borders and we can't do much about it. This one, okay, it can support the local economy and support our businesses. I think that's the plus point. And for us, that's the win-win.
Actually, I wanted to pick on the good experience you mentioned at the back end. Actually, kudos to the back end teams that have been working on the voucher product. They've really done, a really good job at making it very seamless. I don't know whether you remember during COVID days, there was an earlier version called the grocery voucher that was in paper form. Actually, we've come a great way since then because the GovTech teams and the implementation partners like PA have really improved their processes such that it's really a seamless experience both for the merchants as well as the individual.
I feel like the merchants got happier and happier when I talk about the voucher. When I first started, they'd be like, 不要啦, right? Like, do I really want to take a voucher? But now it's like, okay, it's just a scan away. That's an improvement, right? So I think that is very interesting. So maybe we talk a little bit about the more technical stuff, right? So I think these are the easy, fun things. So I'm one of those people that actually read the budget documents, not the whole thing, but on your website, your PDF file, every single thing. I click, go and take a look at what's going on, So I'm the minority, right? I'm very sure. But I do think our audience also care a little bit at that level. So some questions start to arise around mechanics. Why certain things work this way, why certain things work the other way, right? So let's say like household units, right? Household unit is one of those sometimes it feels a bit arcane. As a unit of, I think what some people will call means testing, or I just see as a measurement, a unit of measurement, right? So some policy you'll be like, okay, the individual gets what. Some policy is tied to the overall household unit. Some policy is tied to, income per capita within the household unit, right? So, how does that whole thing get determined?
I think the fundamental principle is still that we see the household or the family as a unit of support within our whole social system. Even till today. I think it's still an important policy principle that we hold true. Actually, when we look across at our social policies, what we try to do is to make sure that our low-income households or low-income families get more support than our higher income households. So that's the overarching principle. And then when you then start to look at each individual scheme design, then you have to make a decision. Each ministry makes a decision on whether it is maybe given by household or means tested by household as opposed to being means tested by an individual. And there are some clear-cut cases that you definitely will go by household. For instance, utilities support, like USave or like your SNCC rebates. I mean, each household only pays one, so you give it as a one and you give it to the household as a whole. I think that's very clear-cut. Then when it comes to a bucket of schemes where you try and actually, one of the objectives will be to encourage family support, then you can also think, okay, actually because I want to encourage family support in this space, I then means test by your family income or your per capita household income or household income. I could also give it as a household. So for instance, CDC vouchers are given as a household because actually we think household expenses, groceries, they are shared by the household. And therefore, we should give it as a household. And then we look at things like education. Obviously, your parents pay for you when you're young. You don't have income, right? I mean, test the kid, no use, right? So that's also another very clear-cut example. The flip side is because all of them not earning income, I'll give everybody full subsidies, right? So clearly for that, if you want to give additional subsidies on top of your baseline broad-based subsidies, you want to give additional subsidies to lower income families, then we means test by the family income as well. We apply the same principle to healthcare because a lot of our healthcare services are used by the elderly, who many of them are probably retirees, and we want the family to be around to support them, and therefore also healthcare subsidies are then means tested by a family income. When you look at the other side of the house, where you talk about individual schemes, that's when, let's say we are trying to incentivize individual effort, then maybe we will tilt more towards actually means testing by the individual's income. So for instance, your employment-related schemes like workfare, they tend to focus more on the individual's income to be the main deciding factor of whether you receive support or not. Same goes for job seeker support, where I look at your last drawn without looking at your family income. This is the general principle, but just to underline the main principle as well, that we still look to the family as a strong means of support for every individual in Singapore. We carry that principle in the design of all the social policies.
Can you expand as to why is that the case?
We still want to actually nurture the family as a first line of support for Singaporeans. I think it's quite important because the state can only do so much. It's actually very difficult to be very accurate about means testing. There are only so many pieces of information you can use to determine whether someone gets something or not. The most common indicators that we use are income and then your house type or your annual value.
The big black box of annual value.
But there are so many individual cases that may fall through the cracks. And if the state were to try and help all of them, I think public services might get quite bloated. And you would require quite a lot of individual, tailored kind of support, which we do for a small group of families under, say, MSF's ComCare schemes. But it would be, I think, very important for family to step in first for the majority of these cases. Actually, when you receive help from the family, I still think it feels better than receiving something from the state.
Hey, for all of you new to the channel, welcome to the Financial Coconut Podcast. I'm your host, Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut. And for all of you, this is a special episode in partnership with the Ministry of Finance to dig deeper into Budget 2025. And if you are wondering what is the kind of support that you're going to get from Budget 2025, very simple. Head over to go.gov.sg/support for you calculator. I repeat, go.gov.sg/support for you calculator to get an estimate of the kind of support you're going to get from Budget 2025. And with that, we're going to keep rolling and understand more. So let's continue.
It also goes to another question that I have, which is how do you then prioritize all these different funding? Because there's just so many things that you can spend on. And every year we talk about a tight fiscal position. Yeah,
Every year.
Every year. So
Never end one.
what are some thought process behind that? Which
we cannot
one
cancel.
which one to allocate budget? How much to allocate? How to make sure you don't over allocate, under allocate? What is the thought process behind it?
At the beginning, I told you a little bit about this process where we have these negotiations with the individual ministries about how much they get to spend. And then we kind of, once we have agreed on what their budget is going to be, that's called their block budget. And it'll be in place for the next 5 years or so, right? And then the way we size those block budgets are kind of bottom up. They present us all their plans. And a lot of it is BAU stuff, right? It's stuff that you already know how much is going to be spent on. There's quite a lot of certainty about, what is going to be, how much you need So for example, MOE comes to us and they need funding for their teachers, right? UM, and they have 50,000, 30,000 teachers or so, right? That's not going to be a huge surprise. And then we can bake that in. I would say there's quite a big proportion of a budget that is decided like that, where, the BAU, keep the lights on type of thing. It's all managed through this kind of process, right? But of course, then we need some way to decide, our priorities are changing, our operating context is changing, right? There's aging coming up. We need to spend more on healthcare. We need to spend more on preschool, security needs. Given recent events, geopolitical events, I think security needs are going to go up too. How are we going to pivot, devote a bit more of our resources towards some of these new priority areas? So that's when we have a different process where kind of like a pot of funds set aside. We call that a reinvestment fund. Basically a competitive pool of funds where ministries will come in and submit bids for it. There's a process in which, all these proposals are ranked. So we have of course, a budget given to us. Our fiscal policy colleagues will say, okay, this year, the reinvestment fund pot is going to be X billion, right? But the amount of proposals that come in asking for resources definitely going to be X times 2 around there. And it's a hybrid approach. Some of it is also assessing the merits of the proposal. Say, okay, look, do you have a good business case, theory of change, right? Yeah. Do you have certainty that, it's going to pan out this way? What are your KPIs for success and so on? And then those projects that are well thought out, have good theory of change, then we resource more. And then we also give some thought to, okay, look, is this proposal in a priority area, right? We know that spending needs are going to go out in XYZ areas. To your proposals, are your proposals in these areas? Then we'll try to give more priority to that. And then through that competitive process, that's how we kind of shift our budget slowly towards some of these new priorities.
And how do you account for the balance between short-term requirements like your CDC voucher and all that, which of course everyone absolutely love. I love it too. Versus the longer-term stuff,
I think some people don't care about it, but anyway, and that's a privilege.
Then you all can donate,
it's a privilege to not need to care about it.
And of course, the longer-term things like Singapore sea level is rising, things like that. Because again, tight fiscal position, only so much money. How do you decide? 50-50, 70-30? How do you think about how much to allocate to the right thing, short-term versus long-term?
Actually, the short-term measures in this particular budget is only about 5% of the overall budget.
But they get all the airtime.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I know.
So that's why,
that's why you're here today. Okay.
Right. So that's why John emphasized at the start that the budget is more than the budget statement.
I'm sure.
There's a lot of thinking that goes behind that on the longer term objectives and programs that we need to fund and put in place. Yeah, so maybe I would say we spend most of our time thinking about the long term, and then the short term measures are what we also need to pay attention to and put in place. The key priorities are for the long term.
Actually, it's quite problematic if you're always thinking about the short term, right? That means you're always firefighting, right? And I don't want the state to be doing that. just say there are other things that I want the state to do, right? So I think especially amongst the middle upper class professionals, as much as they are doing well, it does feel like it's getting harder, right? It does feel like the job market is getting dynamic is the nice way to put it. People get fired, they gotta change job, and there's the whole thing of like a lack of job security, which also then leads to a lack of financial security. Then, people feel flustered and that whole thing, right? And you start to see, or at least from the ground sense, you start to see this thing creep higher and higher up the income ladder, for lack of a better way to put it. Even the people that are doing not too bad, they also worry. And sometimes it may be objectively not accurate one, because like objectively the numbers is like, okay, but the emotions, the feel and the uncertainty out there is getting, larger, right? So with that as the backdrop, I think a lot of the middle class would like to see the state carry more responsibility, would like to see an expansion of social policies, whether is it some of the evolution like CPF Life, or even expanding MediShield, to cover more as a national run scheme. Then we don't need to, constantly get the premium bigger and bigger. All those type of things that the middle class actually want. Like people are seeking as a result of greater uncertainty in the market, right? So like, how do you all think of these things, and how does the whole thing run internally?
There is truth in the fact that things are getting more uncertain. So not only in the job market, there's AI. I mean, your geopolitical situation is getting worse. You raised MediShield Life. Actually, MediShield Life was not in place before 2015. Before 2015, MediShield Life was MediShield. and actually it did not cover everybody. There were people with pre-existing conditions who were not covered. CPF Life was introduced slightly before that. Again, that provides some safety net for people who sort of live longer than they expect to live, and it represents some kind of risk pooling. And we've been changing the social security or social safety nets over the years, also with expansion of workfare, also with the introduction of now the job seeker support scheme, which provides you a 6-month payout if you get involuntarily unemployed. I think all these are measures to actually expand the social safety net to make sure that there is more buffer for unexpected shocks. We are open to see whether there's a need to do more. I think never say never. We have to monitor the situation and see whether there's a need to give more protection. And I think you're absolutely right that, even someone from a middle class family, if they meet an unexpected bad shock, could fall into quite a bad situation. And I think that's when the state does need to come in to some extent to help them.
So then this ties up with your earlier point, which is the family as a unit and then the state as a growing responsibility. In some sense, I think that's a fair statement to say the state is growing in its responsibility pool, right?
In fact, social spending has doubled.
On the part on limited resources, right? A big part of your resourcing essentially is tax revenue, right? And I think that's been the talk of the town for a while, and as more and more Singaporeans want to have more social spending, all these good things that people want, then taxes become an inevitable part of the discussion, right? So, like things like GST or like wealth tax, maybe can give us some thought process around why ultimately the ministry or the government broadly chosen this path.
Why GST, even though you ended up a surplus this year, right? Can delay or not? It's actually quite reasonable. If I want to work in the Ministry of Finance, I think it's very, very reasonable question to ask. And I think it helps to, maybe we backtrack, rewind to 2020. This was during COVID, right? We were in the middle of battling COVID. We had, I think in 2020, we rolled out 5 budgets. I still remember the names: Unity, Resilience, Solidarity. So 2025 budgets, 2021 3 budgets, and I think we drew on reserves 5 times. There was a lot of uncertainty, right? You don't know how the virus is going to mutate. You don't actually, at some point we didn't even know what the virus was called, but we didn't know, are we going to be DOSCON orange, red? From red, are we going to go back to yellow when? Then circuit breaker or another one or not, right? So there's so much uncertainty. I mean, not just locally, right? Globally, there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen. Economies are also not doing well, right? So people are worried for their jobs. At the same time, there's a lot of uncertainty on that front, but we had a lot of certainty about how much our spending will grow. Because when we first talked about the GST increase back in budget 2018, we already saw the writing on the wall, right? 2010, our population, the proportion of population that's aged below 65 was 1 in 4, right? By 110, right? By 2030, that proportion is going to change to 1 in 4. So rapidly aging population, and we know we're going to have to spend more. And we know this fiscal gap is going to appear soon, right? So we had a lot of uncertainty on the domestic front and a lot of certainty on the spending front. But how do we plug the fiscal gap then? We actually took a look at all our revenues. It's not like we immediately set on GST. We're like, okay, I'll whack GST. Actually, we did a number of things first. We did property tax changes. We did ABSD. We did personal income tax. We did the changes to the ARF tiers on your more expensive cars, luxury cars. These were all the other options that we explored and we rolled out. But honestly, those are not big enough to cover that fiscal gap that we saw. And the only way that we could cover it was through a large, broad-based tax like GST. Right? So we knew we had to do GST. I think the only question was when. So when 2022 came around, during budget 2020, 2021, we said, okay, maybe it's not a good time to raise GST, right? But 2022, when the situation started to stabilize, then we said, okay, it's time to raise GST and we will do it in 2 steps, right? 2023, 1%, 2024, another 1%. But at the same time that we rolled out, that we implemented a GST hike, I think we also introduced the assurance package, or AP, we call it for short. And this assurance package is kind of like our way of being able to be responsive to the situation. So if inflation comes in a lot higher than we expect, then actually what we can do is we can juice up AP, we can give out a lot more, right? We'll flow back some of these additional revenues to help Singaporeans. And in fact, we did juice up the AP quite a number of times. If I recall, it was like $6 billion, the AP spending at the start. And towards the end, I think it was more than $13 billion. Ming Jing more than doubled the amount of AP that we're giving out. And this AP actually ensured that the vast majority of Singaporean households, for them, the GST impact is going to be delayed by 5 years at least. So that was how we did it. And actually, the interesting thing about GST is that most of our GST revenue comes from foreigners, foreign tourists, high income lah. Right? So I think the stat is like 50% of net GST collected, which is GST minus our GST voucher. Half of that is contributed by foreigners and foreign tourists lah. So that's where the burden of the GST falls. So that's why we went ahead. And I think people also talk about, hey, you ended up surplus, then how? But again, if you look back on our fiscal position, in 2020, before 2024, like 2023, our corporate income tax revenues are quite stable, around 3-ish% of GDP, 3.1, 3.2 or so on. And then in 2024, it spiked to 4.1%, right? And actually, we are still trying to unpack the reasons. I mean, it's not clear to us exactly why, but it was definitely unexpected. And I mean, we didn't raise corporate income tax. Right? Of all the tax types that we raised, we didn't raise CIT, and yet it spiked so heavily, right? So that CIT upside was unexpected. And I don't think we can rely on a source of a boost in revenue that's unexpected lah. So that's why I think we went ahead with the GST lah.
I got 2 questions to extend, right? One is on the corporate, we'll go there, but the other one is on taxing wealth, right? Because there's a big part. I think Prime Minister went on multiple speeches talking about if you do better, you should contribute more. And I don't think that is a moral ground that anybody will debate, right? I think it's universal lah. If you do better, you contribute more. I don't think that's hard, But then the question would then be, okay, so what does that mean, right? From an executional standpoint, right? Because people will say things like, there are no capital gains tax, no wealth tax, I'm sure you see it all over the internet, right? So like what is the point of view? Like how are you then taxing that wealth, right? Like people that are doing better, how do you do it?
So I think philosophically, we do agree that taxing wealth makes sense, right? It's very progressive and it's in line with this principle that if you do well, you should contribute more. I think the only question really is, how do we go about doing it, right? It's really a question of very practical considerations. So the way we have done wealth taxes here in Singapore, I'm not sure if these are classically thought of as wealth taxes, but actually we do tax wealth. It's just that the wealth that we tax is like luxury cars, is a form of wealth, right? Property, which is an immovable asset, actually the wealthy will spend on property. But beyond that, it's kind of difficult to look at other types of wealth to tax because we have studied the experience of other countries. Other countries have also tried implementing wealth taxes, right? Switzerland and so on. And we do find that it's not very easy. There's quite a lot of
mobility in the wealth when it's immovable.
Yeah. So that's why we have picked those wealth asset classes that are very difficult to
move away. As a good policy maker, you should never be close to ideas. So I think the Ministry of Finance is always in this phase of discovery and thinking ahead on what next. How can we improve the system? So we will see.
Because the extension is, if you start relying on wealth taxes through immovable assets like property, then you become outsized incentivized in the property market pricing, right? So there's that whole, spiel of discussion, which we can go on in another discussion, in the interest of time. One last question on this. So you guys say that, okay, cannot rely on a tax source that is not consistent, right? I think there's no qualms about that. People get it. So first time round, inconsistent, right? First time round, this big bump in corporate income tax is inconsistent. It's an anomaly lah. We see it as an anomaly, right? So if next year, we see it happen again, right? That means corporate income tax stays high. In the current structure, it is probably not wise to roll back some of the other tax changes that you have made. How would that surplus then go back to the people? How are you envisioning it, right? If this thing continues to stay high, right, there is that big surplus now. And other than allowing more ministries to do more things, more people can win the bid. Right? Other than that, how would that surplus then flow back? From your point of view, how would that work?
Maybe first of all, I want to question this assumption that actually these revenues might stay high. Because in fact, we were worried about quite the opposite problem, right? Because of this whole base erosion and profit shifting initiative, right, that's been going on BEPS, right? And your listeners must be quite familiar, right?
Global tax regime. Yeah.
And so the two pillars of BEPS actually have countervailing effects, right? They have opposite effects. One will have the effect of reducing our revenues. The other might have the effect of increasing it. And to be honest, we're not sure which direction is going to prevail. And there's even more uncertainty now, depending on what the US chooses to do and how other countries react to it, right? So I think it will really have to be a wait and see in terms of how it impacts corporate tax revenues, I talked a bit about the process, but I mean, actually, the whole landscape now has changed. Countries out there are trying to make sure that investments come to them, right? And so we got to be real. I think we have to compete. We need to be spending more to incentivize some of these companies come here, create jobs for Singaporeans. And I think that is going to be where the money needs to go. We will need to reinvest that. Because if we're taking out more from the corporates than we're giving back, we are surely in trouble. It must mean that we are not working hard enough to attract investments. Broadly, I think that's how I would characterize it.
And honestly, we still do not know the full extent of the impact of the aging population. And the kind of healthcare costs that would arise from an increasingly long-living population, and not necessarily always healthy at the end of life.
To be fair, that's where most of the expense actually go to at the last phase of life.
It's well and good, and that's what we hope to achieve with things like Healthier SG, that actually everyone extends their healthy life expectancy.
Yeah.
But when it comes to an unhealthy life expectancy at the end of life, it's actually really costly to everyone involved.
This one must give MOH, right? Because it's cheaper to give me free gym pass, than pay for the thing at the end.
Exactly.
Right? So, and I think the facilities are very competitive these days. Maybe a decade ago, the gym cannot tahan.
This is the Active SG
yeah,
gym.
Active SG gym. The new facilities are very good, right?
The one you must thank MCCY.
Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed today's episode. I feel like I can go on for another 3 more. So there's so many other things I want to ask. It's very intriguing. Very appreciative, MOF. Work with us on this episode to get this going. So for our listeners, if you enjoyed the episode, I think it is also as an informed citizenry that you want to go beyond the budget speech, right? Go to the MOF website, read all the things there. So yeah, any last words you want to share with our audience?
Try joining MOF, I think. It's a wonderful experience and very fulfilling.
Are you on the recruitment department?
Oh, I'm always recruiting.
Always on the
Always
recruitment.
recruiting,
Okay. Any last things you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you have good policy ideas, honestly, we are always happy to hear them, send them our way. Be happy to take a listen.
Thank you for your time. We hope you enjoy yourself, and we'll see you in the next episode of Choose with TFC. Bye-bye.